Very warm greetings, everyone. Welcome back to our series of Introduction to Environmental Economics. We have been talking about welfare, efficiency, and markets in our lecture of today's lecture, and we're talking about Pareto optimality. In the lecture, we have been discussing about the Pareto optimality, Pareto efficiency, and Pareto inefficiency. So we have said that an allocation that lies inside the Pareto frontier is inefficient. However, the reason that it is inefficient, the inefficiency of all the points which are lying inside the Pareto frontier are considered as inefficient and undesirable. Now, the reason that why are they considered inefficient and undesirable is that the resources are left behind on the table. So, you're not optimally utilizing all the resources. That is why they are undesirable and inefficient. It would be possible to move to another allocation where everybody does get better and has more of goods to consume and more of utility to achieve. So when there is a scope of improvement, therefore that is why they are called as inefficient. Considering this, again we look at the graph and we see that these movements are possible. If you consider an allocation or a point A, then you will see that B does not get anything. At point A, which is located on the x-axis, B is not getting any utility out of it. Extreme point. Similarly, if you consider B point or allocation, then A is not getting any utility out of it. Only B has a utility. So these are extreme points on the frontier. A Z allocation which lies on the frontier is trying to allocate utilities to both A and B equitably. So we will talk about these allocations, that which one should be preferred and which should not be. X is definitely inefficient, as we have discussed in our lecture, because any allocation in the shaded area is Pareto improvement over the X. No one would choose X over other alternatives, and we cannot choose between. However, all the movements within the shaded area are preferable over X. But however, you should also see the allocations A, B and Z. We cannot choose between A, B or Z. These are all Pareto optimal allocations. We cannot compare different allocations that lie along the Pareto frontier. In the figure, AB is Pareto frontier. Points A and B have all the utility going to only two individuals, which is not too equitable. As we discussed recently, that point A and B are not very equitable, because here all the resources are going to only one individual and zero to the other. We cannot say whether A or B is more desirable or socially desirable than the allocation Z, though we have seen that Z is equitable in the middle and it is distributing the utility equitably. At Z, the good is divided more evenly and efficiently, may not be the goal of the economy of distributing and dividing the good equally. The main objective of the economy may not be this, that to reach Z. They are talking about Pareto optimality. The economy is talking more concerned about Pareto optimality, not attaining the equitable distribution. Economists may promote a movement from X to S because it is Pareto improvement. Some economists may view A as undeserving and might prefer Y or R or even Z over A, because A gives utility to only one individual. So if you take a ethical stand of an economist, Y, R or even Z is preferred over A. It can be preferred, but you cannot say they are Pareto preferred. A Pareto improvement may not imply that the outcome, that is satisfying the equitable criteria. Equality may persist even after a Pareto improvement has happened. So, inequality is possible even after the Pareto improvement. The term efficiency here refers to the process of increasing societal productivity. So, a society can have Pareto efficiency while also having high level of inequality. So, it's very important to distinguish these terms. So, Pareto efficiency by default does not imply equality. Having high levels of inequality, a society may be having a Pareto efficiency. When making a judgment, it is critical to consider various aspects including social efficiency, overall welfare, and diminishing marginal value. All these concepts have to be taken into account when you're talking about ethical judgment. Now, what is the relationship between Pareto efficiency and market failure? We have seen the competitive markets, they are considered idealized markets that achieve an equilibrium allocation of resources, that is Pareto optimal allocation of resources. So, we have seen the two fundamental theorems of welfare economics, that all competitive markets, they are Pareto optimal or Pareto efficient. Now, what do you mean by market failure? So, market failure is when the first fundamental theorem of welfare is invalid. It is the situation when the decision made through the markets does not come out to be efficient. In case of free markets, market failure is defined as an inefficient allocation of resources. Market failure generally implies Pareto inefficiency. Competitive markets, we have seen, according to the first welfare theorem, implies Pareto optimality or Pareto efficiency, while market failure by default will imply Pareto inefficiency. Now, let us take an example to understand how market failure occurs. Example of excessive consumption of depreciating items such as drugs, etc. This results into external costs to non-smokers and premature death to the smokers who do not quit smoking. So, what are the externalities involved in smoking or taking drugs? It leads to, on the society as a whole, it leads to an external cost to the non-smokers. And from the smoking point of view, we divide the society into smokers and non-smokers. So, since we are talking a commodity which is smoking and using drugs, consumption of drugs, so from that perspective, we have a society of smokers and non-smokers. Non-smokers have an external cost of consuming the smoke, and premature death is there for the smokers. An increase in the price of cigarettes would motivate people to quit smoking while also raising the funds for the treatment of smoking related to the ailment. Some economists contend that Pareto efficiency could serve as an ideological tool. Since capitalism, if you consider, is a self-regulated system, if one perspective of viewing capitalism is that it's a self-regulated system, it is likely that it is embedded in the problem such as unemployment would imply deviating from the equilibrium. So basically, it's a philosophical view that in case you consider capitalism as a self-regulated mechanism, for capitalism, unemployment would be considered as deviating from the efficiency. So, Pareto efficiency does not require equitable distribution of wealth. An economy where a wealthy person or wealth is in the hands of few or vast majority or resources are confined to few can also be Pareto efficient. In other words, to say, as we have seen in capitalism, it results into inequality and it results into the ownership of resource in the hands of few. Then from the perspective of Pareto optimality, it may result into Pareto efficient outcome also. Distribution, the very famous example to understand Pareto optimality, efficiency and equity and distribution is the distribution of pie among the three people. The most equitable distribution would be to assign 1/3 to each person. However, assigning half section of the pie to each of the two individuals and none to the third individual is also considered Pareto optimal, despite of it being not equitable. If you just divide pie into two parts and give two people half and do not give anything to the third person is also Pareto optimal. The reason is, it is because no individual insists in this kind of a distribution, no individual could be better off without decreasing the someone's share. So that is why this is because of this particular reasoning, this situation is also considered as Pareto optimal. There can be several other examples of this kind, and they can be examples of inefficiency of distribution of pie. Allocating a quarter of pie, suppose we divide the pie into a quarter. Allocating that quarter of the pie to each of the three individuals and the rest of the remaining pie is discarded or thrown away. So do you think that this kind of a distribution is Pareto optimal or it is equitable? This is the point to understand. If you do that, then it is Pareto inefficient. It may be a Pareto optimal, but it is inefficient. The reason is that you have not fully utilized the whole of pie, which was your resource. You discarded it finally. So it may be equitable because every person got a benefit of the same quantity or magnitude, but the whole of resources, some part was discarded. So it is inefficient, though it was equitable. So we move on to the criticism of Pareto efficiency. The liberal paradox, which was given by Amartya Sen, it exhibited that when the people have preferences about what other people do, then the goal of Pareto efficiency can be conflict with the individual liberty. When you are more concerned what other people's and they're preferring what other people's choose, then the whole goal of achieving Pareto efficiency can become a conflict, and it can become a conflict with the individual liberty. Definitely. Then another criticism was proposed by the Wharton School professor who was Ben Lockwood. He argues that one of the possible reasons is that any other efficiency criteria which is established by neoclassical domain will reduce the Pareto efficiency in the end. So that was another probable situation pointed out by him. Examples of inefficiency in the environment as an environmental concepts are commonly prevailing in terms of pollution. So let us see what kind of inefficiencies, Pareto inefficiencies we can see which are prevalent in the environment economics point of view or from the perspective of environment. If the polluters are regulated so that their marginal cost of pollution control is regulated, but suppose there are polluters who have different variety of marginal cost pollution control, then there is an opportunity of Pareto improvement. How is it possible? Let us visit that. Firms have different cost control of pollution. Some firms will have higher cost control, while other firms will have a lower cost of control. If the firms with high cost control, they pay the firms which have low cost control to undertake, they motivate them to undertake the responsibility for pollution reduction, then you are moving towards a higher Pareto improvement. Another example of inefficiency in environmental concept is that the overall pollution remaining same, but the firms which are spending. So how can you say this situation will be a Pareto improvement? That when low cost firms are given more responsibility for reducing pollution, then the cost is distributed, cost of reducing pollution is distributed evenly among others, and the final pollution which you get, outcome the pollution which you get, is efficient. And since nobody is losing, everybody is gaining in terms of cost, so such a movement will be considered as a Pareto improvement. So this was the case of Pareto inefficiency in case of environment, when the firms have different variety of marginal costs of abatement or pollution control. Another example of inefficiency in the environmental concept is air automobile. Suppose there is an automobile paint plant which is located next to the coal fire power plant. Automatically one can easily understand the externality there. The paint shop, which automobile paint shop, is easily getting harmed or disrupted because of the emissions being generated from the coal plant. The paint plant or the paint shop needs a clean environment to obtain the best finishing of the cars. The power plant which is next to the paint plant, a paint shop, is independent of the paint shop and it blames for locating it in the next door. Now, there is a possibility of Pareto improvement in this case, is to make the paint shop pay the power plant to use or clean up the environment or use a technology which reduces the emissions. It increases the profitability of the paint shop because with no pollution they will try to generate more profits, and even after paying to the power plant they'll be having enough resources without decreasing the profitability of the paint of the plant. So this way both of them are moving towards a Pareto improvement situation, and such a situation would be Pareto preferable or Pareto improvement. Another example related to environment is carbon dioxide emissions leading to the climate change. Suppose the world would be a better place with significantly reduced emissions of greenhouse gases. There would be a way of controlling emissions so that everybody is made better off and there is a possibility of Pareto improvement situation. So, all the examples we are able to construct another alternative, leaving the first alternative where it is inefficiency, but we are trying to move, or we are able to move to another alternative which is different from the original situation, and that alternative initial situation was Pareto inefficient, and we are trying to move and we are able to move to a new situation which is Pareto improved situation. Such a movement will be called as Pareto improvement. Nobody is worse off and someone was made better off since the original situation, and that is the original situation given was Pareto inefficient. However, this does not mean that Pareto improvement always results in efficiency. This is very, very important point to understand. Pareto improvement may not lead to efficiency. This does not mean that Pareto improvement will always be, from the efficiency point of view, will be a better option. It will be a case only if it is impossible to make any further improvement. So it will can be considered, any Pareto improvement can be considered efficient if and only if you are moving to the frontier, Pareto frontier, because all the points on the Pareto frontier are Pareto efficient and optimal. So all Pareto improvements may not result in Pareto efficiency. Pareto improvement and potential Pareto improvement, there is a slight difference between the two terms. When the resource transfer, that is in terms of monetary benefits, money, is packaged together with the changes in the physical quantity of pollution, then the two terms will become interchangeable. Efficiency means Pareto optimality and inefficiency means lack of Pareto optimality. Any economy operating on the frontier, Pareto frontier, is efficient. If it is not operating on Pareto efficiency on the frontier, then that point is inefficient. Increasing the efficiency of an economy means moving closer and closer to the Pareto frontier. Now, what is the relationship between the efficiency and competitiveness in the market? There are two types of inefficiency. Let us first understand the inefficiencies. Then only we will move on to the efficiency, maybe in the next lecture. The two types of inefficiencies that can occur in the economy are inefficiencies in exchange and inefficiencies in production. We are talking about environment economics. So most of our examples will be based on environment related issues. Let us take an example of inefficiency in exchange. It means that resources could be moved around among the individuals without making anyone worse off. One of the examples of environmental good or environmental related issue is municipal solid waste from the large city. What do you do with this particular externality? How do you do away with it? How do you find the efficient outcome? Suppose the law prohibits the transport of waste across the state and regions because of the boundation and laws. One cannot just take away the solid waste and move to a different state or region. This implies that the waste must be disposed of somewhere locally, possibly in an area where high population density is there. Some kind of rural region might take this responsibility of waste disposal and at a minimum appropriate level of fee or charge at a lower disposable cost, making everyone better off. Now such a situation is difficult to happen, but suppose it happens, then efficiency could be promoted by removing such a restriction on the waste shipment. So if you, in such a case, either that happens that with a small amount in the local area, the rural area, it is one is able to dispose of, and the other one is that from the efficiency point of view, it can be taken to a different state altogether. Inefficiencies in productions also exist. Suppose environmental regulation call for the use of scrubbers in order to reduce the smoke generation in a factory. Factory could achieve the same level of emission reduction by changing the production process, but the rules and the regulation do not allow the factory to change the production process. But there is a cost of using the scrubber to the factory. So socially it is not viable. Changing the production process is much economically viable for the factory. So resources are therefore wasted on production, and how do you find out the efficient outcome? Everyone would become better off by using the method of pollution control or at a cost effective manner. So providing too much or too little of the pollution would be inefficient. On the same grounds, related to competitive markets, we would be discussing about the two fundamental theorems that competitive markets are efficient and they lead to Pareto optimality and Pareto frontier, and any Pareto optimality point can be achieved by a competitive market by appropriate transfer of income among individuals. Now, to conclude the whole lecture, we have overviewed the concept of efficiency, the concept of Pareto optimality was presented, and we also discussed the relationship between the Pareto optimality and equity. Pareto optimality and market failure was also discussed. Limitations of Pareto optimality were also discussed. And finally, the notion of inefficiencies in the market was discussed with a special focus on the fundamental theorems of welfare economics. In the next lecture, we would be definitely talking about we have talked about inefficiency. Now we will be moving on to the efficiency related to the environmental goods and how do you solve the problem of efficiency related to the environmental issues. Thank you for the patience. Thank you so much.